Okay. I'd like to bring the Queen Anne's County Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, September 12th, 2024 to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Public comment?
Nothing digitally.
Okey-doke. Meeting minute review.
Madam Chair, I propose that we accept the meeting minutes as presented for the June 13, 2024 meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Do you want to come up with the proposal and requested action?
Yes. So, good morning, Amy Murdoch, Planning Director. Before you, next on the agenda, you have a proposed amendment to the rules of the Queen Anne's County Planning Commission Rules of Operation. We last updated these rules when we added testimony and correspondence protocols. At this point, we wanted to bring to your attention an update, or it's not an update to the annotated code, but there's been a more recent addition to the annotated code that allows for boards and commissions to basically do away with paper minutes and implement a video archived or audio archived set of minutes. A lot of jurisdictions are already doing this. And in light of our transition with our new planning attorney, Lindsay Ryan, who's joining us today, we had asked her to look into this provision for us. The leadership of the county is interested in exploring this option for other boards. And since we are in this period of transition, we asked Lindsay to look into it for us and for our commission to sort of be a guinea pig to see if you're interested in pursuing this option and to see how it works. So I'll kind of let Lindsay talk about how it does work, and I can talk about how it could be implemented for us.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, Lindsay Ryan, and thank you all for being here. I'm happy to be on time, as I stated. So Amy and I looked at this, and the General Provisions Article, Section 306, does permit a public body to not prepare written minutes as long as you have the open session live and archived. So as long as you have it streamed and you're posting it, or you have a manner to archive it so that people can watch it, you don't have to keep the paper minutes. And we've seen a lot of jurisdictions go with this realm because it permits more transparency. If someone misses a meeting, for example, they can go on the next day and watch the live video that's been archived rather than waiting 30, or in this instance, 60 days for getting posted minutes because you didn't have a meeting last month. So it's really to promote transparency. What we did within your rules was provided that you could post the archived meetings, and it makes it permissible but not mandatory. So if you were to go with this method and you found that it wasn't working for whatever reason, you could always go back. So within your rules, it permits you to continue to keep the written minutes if you want, or you could go with the live streaming. So again, it's not mandatory, but it gives you that flexibility.
And if memory serves me correctly, how long have we been doing archive?
So we have archived minutes going back for over a decade that are already available. I'm not sure how far we go back, but yeah, the video goes back for quite a while, and they are currently available. Those video files are available on the QACTV archived section of their website. Our QACTV team, as we know, is top-notch and are ahead of the curve with a lot of aspects of technology, and especially serving the county's boards and commissions. So what we talked with them about in terms of implementing this to make sure that the transition would be easy and that the access would be very straightforward for this board, but also for the public trying to access, is that how we would manage this would be to not just have those archived minutes on a separate designated site, but that on the agenda center where the public accesses our agendas and minutes, that we would not only have, and that page is getting much more fulsome for us because our agendas are posted there. And within the last year, we've also been making all of our meeting materials available there. We will also then, instead of providing the minutes link, provide a link to the video archives on the same line item as that meeting, and maybe not instantaneously, but over time, the QACTV staff will identify within the video archives breakpoints in the meeting where the agenda items fall, so that the public, if they're interested in today's agenda on the Cedar Lane Solar Farm, they could come back to this meeting and not have to sit and sift through the entire meeting. They could go directly to the item that they're interested in.
Okay.
And verbatim is both a blessing and a curse.
To that point, what safeguards or backup contingency plans maybe do we have in case of a data loss or right, if that archive is lost somehow, right? Bruce spills his coffee on the keyboard or something. Is there where do we go from there? What happens in those cases?
I think he would have to spill his coffee into the cloud.
Okay. So it's highly unlikely, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, and then follow up to that, and I think I know the answer, is then there is therefore no reason to have a meeting minutes in review and then approval of.
Correct.
That's sort of a given.
Yep, because you're posting in real time what occurred, so the public can go back and watch that rather than reviewing the minutes. So
Right.
you wouldn't have to have staff time to type minutes, they
Right.
wouldn't have to review it, and then you don't have to go through the effort of
There's an
approving them.
efficiency gain in there as well
Correct.
as a reduction in meeting time and discussion. And
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
So am I to understand it's held only on the cloud? Do we not keep, this tells you how far back I am on technology. Is it a
I might have
CD
to
or a
ask
DVD?
for some support.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Hi, Bruce Grove from QACTV. It's actually being saved in multiple locations. So we have our hard drive in the basement. It's saved there. It'll be there forever. We have backup hard drives that it goes on there also. And then it'll be on YouTube's server forever. So even if for some reason we lost our server, we can pull old files down. And then it'll also be on our website server. So it's actually in 4 different places at all times.
In
So
addition to the cloud.
yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. So there's literally anywhere we could pull it from as a backup. And if for whatever reason we stop using YouTube one day, there would be another service that we would use to get it to the people anyway that we could pull it from in an emergency situation. But there's hard drives and cloud saves, and it's all over the place. So nothing to worry about on that end.
You satisfied?
EMP.
Well, I get if an EMP hit our building, we would lose our server, but it would still then be in the cloud. It would then still be on YouTube servers. Like it would have to hit multiple servers in multiple locations at the same time.
Here's a question from the dark ages. If you're not on YouTube, can you get to these files?
As long as you have internet service, like as long as you have a
Okay.
browser, yeah, you can
Yeah.
go to our website, and our website has the archive,
Yeah.
so you can find
Okay.
all meetings.
To kind of illustrate the same level of documentation and the same risk to our documentation, currently, should there be a fire, should there be an issue with our database, we could potentially lose our paper copies of minutes. I mean, we don't think we ever will, just as Bruce has explained, we have a lot of redundancies in place, but it's the same risk with any time you're archiving And when we legally have to keep documentation for extended periods of time, and so that's a part of the annotated code's requirement. This is
Isn't
just
the
a new format.
Isn't the irony really that the paper documents actually have a digital file someplace when they were created? Is that preserved at all?
Yes, we do have the digital copies of the minutes on our servers, but there was a time when
Right.
we just had typewriter versions of minutes, and those are obviously a lot more vulnerable.
Hasn't been that long since we've had video or tape recordings of minutes. That's been in my tenure.
Yeah, we're dipping our toe into the future.
Cassette tapes, yeah.
Can I get a resolution, or suggestion for a resolution?
Madam Chair, be it resolved that the Planning Commission regarding the amendments to Article 2, Section 5, and Article 3, Sections 9, 10, and 11, and of the rules of the Queen Anne's County Planning Commission hereby finds that there is a need to modernize the policies for meetings to include an option for providing live and archived video or audio streaming. The Planning Commission hereby amends the rules of the Queen Anne's County Planning Commission by adding live and archived video or audio streaming of meetings to Article 2, Section 5, and Article 3, Sections 9, 10, and 11.
I'll have a second.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved.
Just to
Madam- go
close
ahead.
this topic, I just want to express all staff's appreciation, and I'm sure acknowledge your appreciation of the long service that Sharon Brinster gave to this board. She has been our official taker of minutes and drafter of minutes and writer of the resolutions that have been a part of those minutes. And it was just the timing, because we were in a transition and realizing that we're moving into an era in which we don't really need to keep those minutes, that we made this decision. So, but I definitely want to acknowledge and thank her for her wonderful years of service and friendship to the county and the board.
You're here.
Yep. Very good, thank you. Okay, no extension request, updates, legislation, and legal matters.
I have a few legislative updates, and they're both regarding solar. To let you know that I'm continuing to work on a solar siting legislation committee with state representatives of the private industry, and county government. We are in an era of grappling with our land use ordinance being preempted through the Public Service Commission review of utility scale solar. It is one of the state's key initiatives and priorities to meet the renewable energy portfolio goals. And the solar industry has for many years attempted to pass complete preemption legislation that has been unsuccessful, though there is support through our delegation and through the Senate to come up with some kind of a compromise that is, I would call, preemption light. So, because we are going to lose our siting and land use autonomy on this issue. So what we are working on is a very reasonable means of keeping some of the project review regulations at the local level so that there is a clear partnership between the PPRP staff, which serves the Public Service Commission, and local governments to make sure that, number one, we're not running completely afoul of our land use ordinance and our comprehensive plan, and number two, if we were to do so, we aren't in a position in which we can issue building permits for these projects that are preempted. So the fact that we need to come in line with a reasonable application of standards so that we can actually issue building permits is very important. So this is the third go-around that I've been involved with trying to get legislation through. In the past, the industry has kind of, well, I can, quite honestly, they've scarpered it. We'd been collaborating, and then the industry representatives would walk after we'd worked on language and come up with our own legislation. We feel comfortable that that won't happen this time. If it should happen again, then MACO will carry this legislation forward, and the fact that we've all invested so much time should carry some weight with the legislation, and we still think that this bill will be successful. So we're getting closer. The other piece of solar legislation that was enacted last year is called Solar App, and we're all working on how to implement that. And that requirement is that all local jurisdictions are mandated to either go with this app called Solar App that is, for all intents and purposes, an automatic permit approval for solar permit applications. Obviously, local governments protested this legislation because it doesn't necessarily match with all of our databases. So there's a piece of that legislation that acknowledges if a local jurisdiction has an online permitting process that could act in a similar way to the Solar App, there is an exemption from having to adopt this specific app for permit review. We'll be working with Lindsay to ensure that our citizen self-service portal, which I'm going to update you on as well, that is an online permitting application for our county, will meet that standard so that in Queen Anne's County we will have one building permit application process and not one for all of our projects and then a separate app for solar permits, because that's very cumbersome. So, but we think that we'll be able to meet that standard. So I will update you on our citizen self-service portal. We're just about ready to completely go live with an online application process. Our staff has been working together very hard to make sure that the platform is going to be efficient, and they're working on bugs. We've had pilot developers and other contractors who have helped us to work through some of the kinks in the system. So we think we're in a pretty good position. The next step will be to talk to all of our partner agencies, because once we go live, all of the agencies who review building permits, because our department is really a clearinghouse for a lot of other agencies, we want to make sure that all of our partner agencies know how to use the system and know how to enter their reviews and their comments, because the real intent of this online process is to provide not only ease and access and a more expedited review, but also for applicants to see where their permit is in the process and where it is being snagged so that they can work on, any of the outstanding issues that are holding up their permits. So our intent is that applicants will have an online option that will be quicker, but also our intent is to provide a workstation in the department to show citizens how to use the system. So there'll be a big learning curve for our staff and other agencies to work on any bugs that come up that we haven't already found, but also for applicants to get used to how it works, because we all order online and register for websites, and those are pretty straightforward, but there are a lot more steps, and this is a lot more interactive in terms of information that citizens have to provide and documents that they have to upload. But we think by the fall, or before the fall, we'll be up and running, but we hope that by the fall it'll be pretty smooth.
So will this new platform allow for concurrent reviews with other agencies in a digital platform?
Yes.
And which platform have you chosen?
We are using Tyler Technologies, and our section of it is called EnerGov. And that we've been using EnerGov, so we're all pretty familiar with it, but the interface with the, the web-based submittals is quite different from what we use. So you have to build that application platform for all the various applications that everyone fills out. Yep.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Amy, while we're on the topic, will there also still be the sort of traditional means of paper submittal if folks choose not
yeah,
to? Or
definitely.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll have, the counter will always be open, and we'll still offer those services and also offer an online platform within the office
Right.
for, try to serve everyone's needs. Yep. A few housing updates in terms of affordable housing initiatives. As you know, that's another state initiative, and we've been at the table working on affordable housing options. I attended a meeting with an Easton Affordable Housing Task Force with our housing director, Mike Clark. Because of the work that we've been doing, we've been asked to speak on a number of occasions about the success of Queen Anne's County's program. Lindsay's been helping with the implementation of our MPDU ordinance, our inclusionary housing ordinance. And that ordinance is successful, and you're going to see a lot more of it as you see a lot more residential development coming onto your agendas in the next couple of meetings. So we've done that, and they're working on something. I don't know if it'll be very similar to our inclusionary housing provisions, but they were very interested in it. So we were kind of honored to be asked to do that. And also, I spoke at the MML conference on the ADU, the Accessory Dwelling Unit Task Force work that I had done on the Governor's Task Force, and I co-presented with my MML partner. So there's still a lot of affordable housing work, and you can expect to see more legislation this go around, and I'll update you as that comes about. Locally, another housing and a mixed-use project that you'll be seeing tangentially is the Providence Farm annexation is going through the Centerville process. Centerville is working to annex land sort of right on the other side of the new Board of Ed building that is being constructed and the YMCA that surrounds this office building. So they are looking to annex that property and create a mixed-use housing and commercial development. The Planning Commission just reviewed the annexation request, and that favorable recommendation has gone to their town council. That will then come to this board for recommendation to our county commissioners. Our role is really just to document consistency with the comprehensive plan, but also the zoning, the county zoning is countryside, so it's got basically an agricultural density, and through the state's annexation provisions, a local jurisdiction can request a waiver on our zoning. There's a 5-year hold on the county zoning when an annexation takes place. But there's also a provision to request a waiver of that hold on density and on the uses affiliated with that density. And so we expect that the town of Centerville is going to request that waiver because they want to move forward with the development plan. There's also some open space on that property that's going to have to be amended. So you'll be seeing 2 requests for recommendation to our county commissioners. So it's been exciting out here with the development around us. And otherwise, the last time I updated you, we had a lot of vacancies on staff, and I'm happy to report that our team of inspectors is full again. I last told you about Bill Baum, who joined our team in June, and now Josh McCauley, who came to us through environmental health, so he has some experience doing site visits and working on permits and licenses, so he's been a great addition to our team. Meg Roney is our new permit tech, and she's rounded out that team. And we have a very strong team, and she's been actively engaged in our CSS training as well, so that's been a great fit. And Lauren Pyle is one of our new office coordinators, and she too has jumped right in, and she is actually our systems administrator for the CSS. So we brought in some new people and gave them some big challenges, and they've certainly been up to the task, so we're very happy about that. Our senior planner position remains vacant, and I will update you on that as I have more information. That was a much longer
But you're
update than
still
I expected.
actively trying to
We
fill
are.
that, correct?
Yep, we are.
Okay, is that the end of your updates?
Yes. It's been a while.
Okay, major site plan, Cedar Lane Solar Farm. Steve Johnson?
Guys have enough chairs? Yeah, I think they're okay. Yep. Morning. I'm Steve Johnson. It's nice to see everybody again. From Planning and Zoning, Senior Planner. Hope everybody had a great summer. As stated, we're here to speak about project number SP 24-06-0127 for Cedar Lane Solar Farm LLC, who's proposing to construct a 1.744 megawatt solar array on a 15-acre lease area within a 165.028 acre parcel in the agricultural zoning district, and is requesting major site plan approval. This was last seen by this commission in February, where it was granted concept plan approval and a favorable recommendation to the Board of Appeals. It has most recently received its use from the Board of Appeals in June. This project hasn't really changed from both of those submittals, with the exception of a minor amount of floor area in the form of a storage container on site, and I'll speak about that a little bit later on. This project's located pretty much in the dead center of the county, just to the northwest of Price. Queen Anne's County created the utility scale solar array overlay map in 2017. This is a 2-mile area on either side of the 69 kV power transmission lines running through the county. Solar arrays that sell to off-site customers, including smaller community scale projects such as this, are defined as utility scale in the code and must fall within this district. As you can see by the location of the star on your screen, this project does fall within that district. Tax map 30 parcel 8 lot 14 totals 165.028 acres and is located at 605 Cedar Lane in Church Hill. As you can see, it's currently being utilized for agricultural production, and there's a solar array just to the north of the site. The blue rectangle that you see kind of to the northwest of the site is an existing Delmarva Power substation. This project will connect to that substation. The lease area shown here in dash white is 15 acres, and the fenced-in solar array area is 10.92 acres. Property zoned agricultural. Solar arrays are conditional use within that zoning district. Site's partially located within the Sensitive Species Project Review Area. While there are no rare, threatened, or endangered species within the boundaries of the project, correspondence from DNR does indicate that it falls within the drainage of Southeast Creek, which supports freshwater mussel species, the triangle floater, creeper, and dwarf wedge mussel. This project will adhere to protective measures for aquatic habitat provided by DNR, and a copy of that DNR correspondence was included in your packets. There is a small area of non-tidal wetland buffer within the lease area boundary. It's fuchsia. You can barely make it out here, but you'll be able to see it better on the next slide. There's no disturbance to the wetlands buffers proposed. And to address the forest conservation requirements for the site, 3 acres of existing off-site woodlands will be placed into long-term protection. This is the bricked white area to the left of your screen. It's on Lot 1, and Lot 1 is owned by the same owner as Lot 14. Here's a look at the site plan. As you can see, access is taken from Cedar Lane via new gravel entrance. It's shown there circled in yellow. Again, this is a 1.744 megawatt array that will consist of 4,602 modules and 16 inverters. All wiring associated with this array will be below grade to the point of interconnection, which is shown on your screen circled in red. Parking and deliveries during construction will be within the temporary staging areas. This is the hatched black and white areas that you see on your screen. There will be no parking along Cedar Lane during construction. The permitted floor area for the project site is 1.80 acres. The applicant is proposing 0.003 acres or 160 square feet. This is the storage container I spoke about earlier. It's shown in orange on your screen. You can barely make it out because it's so small, but it's within that temporary staging area to the south, just to the northwest of that pond that you see. The applicant's proposing 35,097 square feet of impervious, which is far less than the maximum permitted of 261,360 square feet. DPW has reviewed and approved the stormwater with this project. While no permanent water and sewer is required for this project, any on-site work exceeding 2 hours will require portable toilet and hand washing facilities. And a condition was included at the end of the staff report for this requirement by environmental health. Noise associated with this array will be less than 60 decibels at the property line. There is no lighting proposed, and the existing topsoil will not be removed from the site. The applicant has provided the required 50-foot landscape buffer. It's shown here in green. It includes canopy trees, understory trees, evergreen shrubs, and a pollinator-friendly herbaceous layer. The owner and operator of the array will enter into a contract with a landscape contractor to provide regular irrigation via a water truck. The detailed water schedule was provided within the landscape plan in the site plan, and paid invoices for the watering will be provided to the zoning department once a month for the first year. And it's my understanding the applicant is utilizing a local contractor for this, and I'll let them speak about that when I finish up. There is also a condition at the end of the staff report regarding the requirement for submitting the paid invoices. The panel, storage container, equipment, and fencing will all be far below the the maximum permitted building height. The maximum height of the panels is 10.5 feet. The storage container and all other equipment is less than 8.5 feet. The required black vinyl coated fence will be 8 feet tall and include all required signage. And finally, the applicant has provided a site access plan. This was included in your packets. Trucks will travel to the site via 301 Price Station Road and Cedar Lane. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm under the understanding that the Price crossover has been closed. So trucks getting to the site will have to, go north or south of there and turn around, from what I understand. So, and that's all I have. I'll try to answer any questions you may have or turn it over to the applicant.
Any questions?
Price Station Road crossover is closed indefinitely?
Right now.
Temporarily.
I'm not sure if they
Well,
closed it.
they just keep saying indefinitely.
So we don't have an updated travel lane access plan yet?
No, that was changed here recently, I think.
Right now, we're using Route 19 and Route Hayden Road.
Hayden Clark? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Kurt Karsten for Cedar Lane Solar Farm.
Wait, can you talk louder?
Okay, I'll try. Sorry, I was sick last week and my voice has not come back. Kurt Karsten for Cedar Lane Solar Farm. And thank you all for hearing us this morning. We don't really have a whole lot to add to Stephen Johnson's report. We're certainly willing to answer any questions. He is correct about the irrigation contract. Zachary Meyer has a copy of that, actually, I think, to submit for the record if necessary. But are there any questions?
Questions?
You know, the one thing I do need to say for this project is it's outside the irrigation circle for the property in this on this property, so it's making use of land that's not used for agricultural, even though it's in an agricultural land area. So we're pretty proud of that aspect of this project.
Can I get a resolution suggestion?
Madam Chair? Oh,
Oh, public comment? Some things never change.
It's coming from a different direction.
You have anything, Bruce? Where'd he go? Did we lose him? Nah, you guys are good. Okay.
all good?
We're all good.
Madam Chair, be it resolved that the Planning Commission regarding the request by Cedar Lane Solar Farm LLC for major site plan approval to construct a 1.744 megawatt AC solar array on a 15-acre lease area within a 165.028 acre parcel in the agricultural zoning district, and as more particularly described in Planning and Zoning File SP-24-06-0127, hereby finds that it does meet all requirements of Chapter 18, will not substantially increase traffic hazards or safety concerns due to traffic generated by the proposed use, the location or orientation of curb cuts, or the layout of internal circulation, does contain a layout of buildings, parking, roads, and utilities that does not substantially increase fire, health, or other public safety hazards, is adequately buffered and screened to minimize potential adverse impacts to neighboring properties and public rights of way, will not substantially increase stormwater drainage or pollution, will not have an unreasonably adverse effect upon property values in the vicinity of the site, will not adversely affect the public welfare, and will provide for public safety through compliance with the state fire code and with any applicable county or municipal fire codes, is compatible with the general character of the surrounding neighborhood, and is consistent with the purpose, goals, and objectives of the 2022 comprehensive plan, and hereby grants major site plan approval subject to the following conditions. If by the time of construction, the panels proposed have changed from that provided on the plans, updated information must be submitted. Applicant must notify planning and zoning when ownership of the solar array changes, and the signage containing emergency contact information must be kept current. Prior to final site plan signature, provide the finalized forest conservation plan and executed long-term protection documents for recordation. Prior to final site plan signature, provide an automatically renewable decommissioning bond that is enforceable by the county. Prior to final site plan signature, provide an automatically renewable landscape surety and maintenance agreement. Per the Department of Environmental Health, until the project is decommissioned, any owner, operator, or subcontractor performing work on the solar array site that lasts for a duration exceeding 2 consecutive hours shall provide portable hand sanitizing and toilet facilities. These facilities shall be provided on-site for the duration of the work being performed and shall be utilized by all workers and/or site visitors during that time. The facilities shall be regularly serviced and all waste shall be disposed of properly off-site in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. As a condition of permit approval, the applicant must adhere to the watering requirements outlined in the approved landscape plan. Applicant shall submit paid invoices to the zoning department monthly for the watering of the landscape buffer plants during the initial year after planting. And prior to final site plan signature, any remaining edits and/or documents required by a reviewing agency are reviewed and approved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, question for council. There was comments made by the staff that the DNR protections would would be mandatory, mandated, would be included in this proposal? Do we need to make that a condition, or is that?
I would,
Okay.
yes.
Madam Chair, I'd like to amend Commissioner Dios's motion to include that the applicant must adhere to the protective measures put forth by Maryland Department of Natural Resources to protect aquatic habitat surrounding rare, threatened, and endangered species. They are outlined in a letter from a Miss Marcia Usselton dated November 9, 23.
You okay with that?
Yes,
Can I get a second to that?
second.
All right, it's been amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Before we go to text amendments, I think we'll take a 5-minute break. Next on the agenda. If I can find the agenda. Is text amendments.
Ready? Stephanie Jones, Long-Range Principal Planner. So you have 3 text amendments before you today. The first text amendment is part of our comprehensive rezoning code update, and that is to permit short-term residential rentals in Queen Anne's County. At this time, this is not a permitted use in the county, but we do have them present. There is some history behind this text amendment. It was conveyed from the commissioners in April to the Planning Commission. It was to be on your May agenda. It was postponed from May due to concerns of it being a commercial use in residential neighborhoods. Throughout the summer, we looked at some data provided by Granicus, which is a online platform that we've contracted with in order to get short-term rental data. And it was confirmed through that we should proceed with the ordinance that was conveyed from the commissioners in April. So that's what you have before you. I will note that you had on your, in front of you this morning, an updated version with the yellow, just to update the definition, to add that it's through a hosting platform utilized through a transient occupant, just to make it a little more clear that it is more succinct with what a short-term rental is. So, but what I want to do is go through the ordinance a little bit just to give you some details about it, because it is to be a permitted use, but there are a lot of conditions through it in order to have it permitted. So the intent behind all of this really is to, address those neighborhood concerns and to protect those neighborhoods where these short-term rentals are currently existing. It's kind of a nationwide thing, so it's not just here. So it's just something that we've known we needed to grapple with, but now's the time since we're doing the zoning code update. So looking specifically at the ordinance, there's requirements, and I'll run through them. So the property owner or property manager has to be located within 25 miles of that short-term rental. There's also conditions in relation to the capacity, the number of people you can have in your short-term rental, or the number of guests in relation to whether you're on public sewer or you have a septic system. It's very important, obviously, to be sure that whatever is happening in these houses are still consistent with what was designed for these houses. Also, if there are guests that are in attendance to these short-term rentals, they have to leave as of 11 p.m. Each night. The outdoor amplified music is to be basically discontinued after 8 p.m. The parking has to be provided.
Why 8 p.m.?
That was a time that we've looked at as being consistent when we originally drafted this. It was something that that was seen as because it is a residential neighborhood, 8 p.m. was appropriate, but.
A lot of these rentals are short-term rentals or weddings and whatever.
Well, they're not going to be. They're not allowed to be within this code. So they would not, unless they have the approval to do so. So if they have the approval as a special events, which I'll get to that in here, they could potentially, through their special events approval, be longer, but they would have to have that approval to do so through the Board of Appeals.
But picking up on what you said, what I read you say was not necessarily a wedding being held there, but these are wedding parties or wedding guests or people who are part of a wedding weekend, so to speak. Okay.
Yeah, those are the people that are utilizing those properties, I'm sure. So all parking has to be provided on site. You can't have parking off of the property in order so that obviously the neighborhood can still continue as needed. It will require a zoning certificate. This is an annual requirement for that property. It does require an initial inspection for the county. Following for the next 4 years, the property owner can do a self-certification. They have to provide an affidavit to the county indicating that, it's appropriately completed. But then on the 5th year, the county will do the inspection. So it gives the property owner a few years to do it as a self-certification. If there is enforcement reasons or concerns, then they're not allowed to do the self-certification. So it just fall back to the county review.
Sorry, Stephanie, before you go further than that, what constitutes that threshold? Is that just a complaint from a neighbor? Is it an enforcement visit from the county?
Yes, so
Okay.
it would have to be, we would, the Granicus program that we have contracted with allows property owners to file complaints to the county through Granicus. We would keep record of all of those enforcement actions, so if there's more than one on the property, we will be notified and have the documentation of that. But really, if it's anything that is in violation of the code, or if there are concerns that have been risen that are to the maximum, we aren't meeting the code anymore, then those would be
That
enforcement.
would trigger a personal
Yeah.
enforcement official visit.
Enforcement,
Got it.
yep.
Which would
And
then
also-
trigger the annual inspection by the county.
Because of
Not
that.
self-certification.
Right.
Thank you.
Also, they have to be, like I mentioned, the special events, so they can't be hosting weddings at these venues or large parties. Now, through the special events, that is a permitted use in the Ag and CS district, so they could go through that avenue in order to permit those, that use itself. The county hotel tax would be applicable, so these properties would be paying a 5% hotel tax to the county. They would have to pay that tax prior to their permit being approved for that year. And then another, looking at the enforcement section, the county has the right to, if there are enforcement issues, basically pull that zoning certificate or revoke it, suspend it. And also there is a indication that if it is revoked or suspended, the county has the right to not approve a zoning certificate for that property for 3 years. So that
For 3 years or for 3 years?
3 years, and it can be, if the property does change hands within that 3 years, it would go on to the next property owner. So there is very high enforcement level, and it's probably, more requirements than regular enforcement, but the intention is to be sure that we're protecting these neighborhoods that these are located in. We have heard some concerns, obviously, through, that summer process of going through looking at data, and then also in the last month since it's been proposed to be on the agenda, there's been concerns about the enforcement about the 3 years time span and it being going on to the next property owner. Somebody can file an appeal to the county, so there is an avenue in order to not require that 3 year if they go through the appeal process through the Board of Appeals. There have been continue to be concerns about being a commercial use in a residential neighborhood. So that is a concern. And then also there's been concerns on the.
How is that being handled?
So the way we have looked at that is this is a residential use. There's case law that indicates that it is the short-term rental is a residential use. I don't know if Lindsay wants to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so there have been cases, and there was one out of Garrett County about 10 years ago, and it's been supported since then, and that related to covenants within an HOA and whether a homeowner within the HOA had the right to utilize their residential property as a short-term rental. And the court determined that a short-term rental is a residential use. While it has commercial benefits, it is a residential use. And then it wasn't prohibited within their provisions, which did prohibit commercial uses. And that's been a standard that the court has applied. And I think going more to that, there has to be a general understanding that as a residential use, you as a homeowner have an inherent constitutional right to utilize your property in whatever residential method you determine. And so I think staff here has done a good job in balancing a property owner's right to use the residential property as a residential use and protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. So that's what she's looked at other jurisdictions to try to do to make sure that while it gives you that right as the homeowner, it's still protecting your neighbors.
Then one of the other concerns that we did hear is just the timing of permitting. Obviously, when this use would become effective after the ordinance is adopted, there might be a slew of zoning certificates that come into the office that have to be reviewed. The concern was that we would not be able to turn them around. All those are not going to come in at one time. The county is not going to, go out and say, you have to be in compliance, the next day after it becomes effective. There is going to be some grace period. We will work with finance and also our the Granicus that we are contracting with to reach out to those property owners to indicate to them, there is this requirement, and you need to apply for your permit or for your zoning certificate. So we plan
How
to.
do you know where the properties are?
So we've worked
They're
Yep.
have not had a register anywhere.
Yep. So the company that we've contracted with, Granicus, they basically what they do is scour the internet.
One on the.
So it's basically someone or AI going out and pulling all of those properties, whether it's on Airbnb or VRBO, HomeAway. There's a whole bunch of them, but they go out and look at them, and then they'll take the photos and match them up to aerial photography that they can find online. So it's very, yes. So that's how those properties are identified, essentially, through that contracted company.
Right.
Yeah. But the one other thing I wanted to point out is that it will be a permitted use in all districts, all zoning districts within a dwelling unit. So that's where they would be permitted. So I think.
It's not permitted like in caretaker, like
So
your migrant workers or come for months at a time.
Right, so it has to be a dwelling unit, so it could be an accessory dwelling unit, which would be are permitted on all properties for someone to have. It could be in the primary, it could be in a commercial, a apartment, it could be in a condo. The migrant worker, that would be a separate use that would have been permitted. So that property owner, I think we would look at that as a little different than your standard dwelling unit, per se.
I have a question. Has staff given any thought to accessory sleeping units? Because a dwelling unit is specifically one that provides provisions for cooking, sleeping, and sanitation, bathroom.
Right.
If I remove the cooktop out of the unit I have above the garage, it happens to overlook Eastern Bay, I now have an accessory unit it's a sleeping unit. It is not a dwelling unit, and therefore I can still rent on a VRBO and not have to comply with this code because it's not a dwelling unit.
So it would have to be a dwelling unit, meet all the requirements of a dwelling unit, having sleeping, your kitchen, bathroom, all the units of a house you would need to operate as a house. So that's where that would come down to. When they would do the inspection for the zoning certificate, they would probably review, the
Document, and then if they added a hot plate later, I think that's something to consider, because if I have a plug-in hot plate, that's not a cooking unit. But if I drop in a 240 plug-and-play, that becomes now a cooking appliance within the unit that's now built in that would put me into a dwelling unit. But if it's just plug-and-play and sits on a countertop, I would say that is not a fixed item, and therefore it's still a sleeping unit.
And we've seen that, not in relation to short-term rentals, but even in relation to, someone saying they don't have an accessory dwelling unit, or they do have an accessory dwelling unit, that indication of getting down to that specificity of, I have this, I don't have that, what makes me a dwelling unit per se. So,
Dwelling and sleeping units, I
Yeah.
think that's the definitive term, that I don't see anything in here about a sleeping unit, that I don't know if we need to get that covered, or if this is strictly for a dwelling
dwelling
unit.
unit, yep.
Okay.
So, but also, I think that if the way that Stephanie updated the definition, to include a unit that is basically being advertised on a platform. I think that if you're in a dwelling unit, but you're renting a space where, because I think Airbnbs do this, where they're renting out rooms, but there's a communal kitchen. I mean, I think that you're sort of breaking down into the granular detail. I think if we capture a rental on that platform, it would be subject to getting a zoning certificate. I think because that platform isn't going to discern whether or not there's a hot plate. If you're advertising on Airbnb, I think that you're going to get picked up, and we would look at it to get a zoning certificate.
But I would tell you I don't have a cooking appliance, and therefore I'm a sleeping unit by every definition out there, and therefore I don't comply.
I think the definition of short-term rental is, I mean, that's going to hold sway over getting a certificate or not.
Well, but part of those definitions specifically refer to apartment units, dwelling units, sleeping units, or no sleeping units, just
yes.
dwelling units, which apply to the three provisions to make it a dwelling unit.
But I guess the argument, so if you have a dwelling unit, which is your house, you could rent a room within that house. But if you have an accessory structure, which is a garage, and you put a room above it, that's not a dwelling unit. That's a garage. Unless you turn it into a dwelling unit, and then you get the accessory dwelling unit, and you get the permission for the short-term rental.
A dwelling unit consists of those three things: provisions for cooking, sanitation, and sleeping. If they don't put in a kitchen, therefore it's no longer a dwelling unit, it's a sleeping unit.
And it wouldn't be permitted for occupancy or a short-term rental in that situation.
And it
I'm
can't be on
asking-
Airbnb.
Well, why not? Airbnb allows me to have a unit to rent without kitchens.
You could go on Airbnb, but the county would issue enforcement because you wouldn't be an approved short-term rental because you wouldn't meet the criteria.
Well, but I'm not a dwelling unit. We've defined only dwelling units.
And we've
My
permitted-
suggestion is to say dwelling and sleeping units. But I don't know if we have a provision in the code or how we return to that. Do we go to the building code as a common definition?
Well,
Do we go to Webster's? Do we go to Black's?
So I think if you were to do that and open short-term rentals to dwelling units and sleeping units, then you are opening the door to, I have an accessory garage or an accessory shed, and I want to rent that out. And I don't think that's what the county wants to permit.
I think this leaves a big hole for us.
So, but I think by defining short-term rental and approving short-term rental only within dwelling units, that, because it's not a permitted use within the code, similarly to how short-term rentals are done now, would be prohibited.
So if I understand you correctly, only a dwelling unit can be a short-term rental in the county.
Correct. If this were adopted. Right now, short-term rentals are not permitted. If this were adopted, only dwelling units. So by the inspection for the accessory structure, they have to show that it's a dwelling unit to permit a short-term rental within that accessory structure.
So I could theoretically go to Mears Point, have a houseboat, take off the kitchen or the galley, the hot plate, if you will, and then I could just rent this out and not have to comply with any of the provisions or safety standards that we're trying to establish for short-term rentals, or pay hotel tax, because I have a sleeping unit, not a dwelling unit.
But that's not a permitted use within the county code.
Right.
Are you clear on that? Because I don't think you are.
I don't agree with it. I think sleeping units need to be identified, but I'm struggling with it.
The intent is for us to only address dwelling units. We don't,
We don't address sleeping
at
units.
this point, we were looking at strictly dwelling units. So there's platforms out there just to rent properties, you know, to put campers on. We did not want to address that at this time. Is that something down the road? Maybe, but at this time, it was dwelling units, and that's what we were addressing.
So no boats, no RVs,
At this point in time,
residential dwelling units,
you
period.
meet the definition of a dwelling unit.
And we're trying to make a whole lot of people legal.
There's
I mean,
100
according to that
and,
map.
188,
I think I put a,
yeah.
Make them legal and recover the benefits from the taxes.
Right. Is that okay? Mr. Reese? No.
It is what it is.
Okay, moving on. Okay,
I think that was most what I had.
okay. So we have some public comment. Bob Bateman?
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you? My name's Bob Bateman. I've been a resident of Queen Anne's County for 27 years. For the past 6 years, I've been on the board of directors of a HOA and currently the president of an HOA, Cove Creek, down in Stevensville, down Route 8. I'd just like to take a couple, just real quick. I got some notes here. I'd like to maybe, they could become on the record when I'm done with them, if that's possible, but that'd be, of course, up to you.
By the way, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, it won't be long, believe me.
Okay.
I understand what you're up against. We've been through a lot with changing covenants in our community for STRs, and you're trying to balance, let's keep the income coming to the county, let's get the taxes in, let's get the restaurant business going, at the same time to try to protect your citizens and your residents, and that's, sometimes they oppose one another. They're somewhat conflicting, I understand that. Other jurisdictions across the country that we've researched, New York City, for example, if you're going to do an STR, you must be owner-occupied in order to do that. You can't do it unless you're in the dwelling as you rent it. That was just put in 2 years ago, because they were hurting the hotel business so much with STRs. But I will tell you that all the local counties that have STR restrictions, Talbot, PG, Anne Arundel, every one of our neighboring, most all, maybe not Kent, I'm not sure if Kent, have one requirement that I'd like to present to you as an additional filter, if you will, or restriction to your proposal. And that is all of them, all of our neighboring counties, including jurisdictions like Berlin, Maryland, even down by Ocean City, have one basic common denominator requirement. In order to STR, it must be your primary residence. That's a common thread across the country and very locally across the state of Maryland, very prevalent. So I'm suggesting that you consider such to add to this, and I would do that in the following way. You have to understand that I understand there's a residential use of property. You sleep there, people rent there. That's residential. People sleep, reside there as temporary renters. But you have to consider who's the owner. Do we really want a county full of outside LLCs coming into this county, buying property, daisy changing those properties, have no consideration of this county or its citizens, and compete with our own citizens for the STR business? You have to be, I think you have to be careful with that. That's what we're dealing with in our community. Outside people, not primary residents, don't even live in the county, don't pay a hotel tax now, hopefully they will soon, right? But the thing of it is, you have to be careful about the residential use, or as opposed to how customers are acquired commercially. And as you say in your documentation, this is a crossover between residential and commercial use. And to your credit, you're trying to find a decent balance, and we all appreciate that. But consider what would happen to this county, to our residents, if it's just full of LLCs owned by people not in this county who don't care about its neighborhoods or its citizens, and simply put they're using property in this county for commercial purposes, call it residential or not, in my opinion. So I would suggest, real quick, I got 3 minutes, I'm probably already done. I am? Okay, I can stop, or you want me to just finish? I'll finish, is that okay? No?
Oh, your time's up, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, Kevin Tracy.
Good Morning. I'm Kevin Tracy. I've been a county resident now for 17 years, and I submitted a proposed bill on this issue almost a year ago, and since then have worked with staff and whatnot. And I appreciate all the time I've spent with Ms. Mordock and Ms. Jones. I just
Kevin,
want
where do you live?
to, down in Cove Creek as well.
Okay.
And I want to make a couple points. So one of the key findings, and I'll note that I'm an attorney, and I'm an attorney and a litigant in ongoing litigation that involves a case that counsel referenced. And the findings that this commission is looking at, the commercial residential use cannot be ignored and cannot be blurred. So the Granicus data that I'm aware of doesn't provide any basis to make a distinction. There's no doubt that, for instance, for the one STR that is in litigation, the owner lives out of county, it's an LLC, part of a real estate empire, makes well over 6 figures of revenue a year. It's strictly commercial. There's absolutely no question. So the case out of Garrett County doesn't define this as commercial as a state law. In fact, Garrett County is not a zoning case. It's a covenant interpretation case, and it's strictly unique to that covenant. It's called the Stillwater Subdivision. It's part of the Deep Creek Lake rental community. So it's a vacation area. It's not applicable to us. There's similar language in the two covenants we're talking about in litigation, but here we're talking about a zoning. So that case, the court says a transient renter's use is residential. They sleep there, they eat. We're talking about the dwelling units, accessory units. They do the things that people do at their homes. That use is residential, but for the owner, their use could be commercial, while their short-term renter's use is residential, okay? That was not an issue in that case, was not decided because there was no prohibitions against commercial use in that subdivision. Here, we're relying upon a zoning change. So it's important that this board really look at the distinction between commercial uses and residential uses. Otherwise, you will be imposing, they're already here. We already heard they're here, they're illegal, but they're imposed on residential neighborhoods. I'm not here to speak against somebody using their home for an incidental short-term rental. That's not the point. It's the point of the commercial enterprise coming in and trying to load up a house 24/7 as much as they can throughout the year to maximize the rental days, the people, and the revenue. The other thing I would ask this commission to look at is the HOA restriction. I had asked staff about adding a line to indicate that you can only do an SDR if it's allowed in your HOA, and the staff and the county doesn't have to look into that and verify that. Just need to add that line to the bill and have the applicant for the certificate of use verify yes or no. Now, otherwise, if it's silent, there will be litigation on this issue. I think we agree that the covenant would control, but the Maryland law has not confirmed that in every instance. So somebody will challenge the gap, if that's not addressed. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Fred Kirsch.
Fred Kirsch, I live on Quarter Creek Drive, which is on Quarter Creek on the Wye River. And it's going to be hard to get this in 3 minutes, but I'm not a photographer, but I take a picture of number 900 Stagwell Road. It lights up our entire creek at night. The property is owned by Beth and Kip Fulks. I don't know whether it's an LLC or whatever, haven't looked into that yet, but it's clearly a commercial use of the property. There's no supervision. There's 3 rentals on our creek, and the 3 of them require no check-in. It's a self-check-in. There's no supervision on what goes on those properties. Number 900, the Folks House, has 10 bedrooms, peaceful retreat for up to 25 guests. Adjoining that is a separate barn, which has a number, sleeps another 7, so they can have 32 people spend the night there. There's no regulation on how many people can be there during the day. The people that come there and rent, they bring their own boats. They jet ski up and down the creek. They water ski. They crab. They tube. I have a large boat. It weighs 140 tons, and there's so much traffic there, it rocks a 140-ton boat. They advertise that they're good for large groups, and that's what we see there. We see dozens of kayaks there. It's like a summer camp. The one on Quarter Creek has 97 positive reviews. 97 in a residential house. That's hardly occasional use. They live outside. The one on Quarter Creek Drive, they live in New York State. There's no supervision when those people are there. The folks, I believe, live in North Baltimore County. It's remote check-in. There's no supervision what goes on. I called the other, last week, there was a fire over there. I called the father-in-law who speaks with me, and he said, well, we have a fire pit, but we don't use it. And within 30 minutes, the fire was gone. I'm assuming somebody called up and had them put the fire out. But these people, while they pay real estate tax, they're not paying any income tax to the state of Maryland. They're not paying any income tax to the county. And we would not have bought our property if there was basically a hotel across the creek. People were buying lots, the remaining lots on the Wye River. They're spending millions of dollars for their lots and then spending millions of dollars on houses. And the legalese can say what they want. It's a commercial use. And you're going to affect the values of the homes that are there. And, you know, the commissioners are elected to represent the people within their districts. And if something doesn't happen to protect the people on the river, there's going to be a change in commissioners. Back in the 1950s, Rouse wanted to develop Wye Island. The people on the river stopped it, thank God. The Wye River is a gem in the county and a gem in the state of Maryland. And then Schaefer wanted to put in a marina up the river under the guise of a fish farm. And I guess the planning board said, yo, you can have your fish farm in the piers, but the minute that fish farm goes out, you have to take the pier down. So he didn't do it. They wanted to build a huge hotel, couldn't do it.
Mr. Kirsch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your
Thank
time's
you.
up. Any other public comment? Oh, sir, can you say your name,
Jody
please?
Schultz, Chester. I don't have a horse in the race happily, but I think it was interesting to comment, and if you could expand on, I know this isn't a question and answer session, about HOAs and the authority they have to not allow a short-term rental is when people buy into these communities and they read their documents and it would say no short-term rental. I think they feel good about that. But I think what I heard you say is that would not hold up in court. I think that's a very important point.
Is it okay if I answer?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Thank
So that specifically, there have been covenants within HOAs that have specifically prohibited or regulated short-term rentals. And so obviously if you purchase into an HOA, you would be subject to those covenants or any amendment. These covenants in particular discussed residential uses but didn't further prohibit short-term rentals. So that's where the distinction was. And of course, the county has no control or authority over HOAs. And so while the county may permit it, it could still be prohibited in specific HOA developments.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
I have one more. Excuse me, I'm sorry, is that all right? I
Sure.
have one more question for it. Do HOAs have the right to change their bylaws after someone's purchased a home?
Yes.
So even though they may not have a rule limiting short-term rentals, they could change that, and if the homeowners,
Yes.
by a majority.
Yep. Generally, it's 60% of the lot owners within the HOA. Of course, it depends on their covenants and bylaws, but yes, they have the authority to amend.
Madam Chair, one question for council. Many conservation easements are very specific about prohibiting commercial activity on the property. And I know of one case where people wanted, this is years ago, establish a wedding factory, I call it. And what prevented them from doing it was a clause in the easement that said no commercial activity permitted. Is this proposed change to the law going to run afoul of that? Does it take precedence, or is the conservation easement still the controlling body?
So the county has the authority to regulate zoning. There are other mechanisms like easements or similarly to HOA covenants that would also control specific property. So in those instances, while the county does permit this as a residential use, if someone had an easement or a covenant that further restricted their property that wouldn't prohibit it, and they were renting it, it wouldn't be the county's place to come in and enforce the HOA or the easement, but anyone impacted it could file a declaratory judgment or injunctive relief saying, you property owner don't have the authority because of this easement. So it's not something the county enforcement would get involved with because it would be a permitted county use, but there are other restrictions prohibiting it.
So at the time of application, the county would be silent on the matter of whether there was an easement on the property?
So generally, and Stephanie or Amy could correct me if I'm wrong, but generally the county only looks at it for zoning and whether it's a permitted use within the zoning, and any other underlying restrictions that are outside of our governance and control, we would not look into. So that would be up to neighboring property owners or someone else that has an interest to bring that to the court's attention.
Okay.
But they'd have to take it to court.
They would. They would have to take it to court. I mean, you would hope that neighbors could work together and say, you have an easement prohibiting this, but if the neighbor said, no, I'm going to rent it anyway, they would have to go and seek a declaration and a court order.
What about Mr. Tracy's suggestion that we add that one line where the person that owns the property has to say whether they have a covenant or not?
We can add the line within there, but then it puts an onus on the county to check and make sure that it exists or doesn't exist. And we, again, don't have...
Well, wouldn't it just help them in court? Why would we have to enforce it?
It wouldn't be enforced. So if there's a line on the application that says covenants do or don't exist, even if the covenant existed saying they couldn't do it, we're still not enforcing that covenant.
Right. And you wouldn't need to, but that gives them
An awareness.
And it also gives the people around them more, I guess, when they go to court.
By saying on the application.
That they certified and they committed perjury on it, right?
Well, I guess as long as it was on the application, but just as a general question and not an enforcement matter.
I mean, you're asking them if they're self-certifying their property, so why, I just don't see why that would be a problem.
I don't, do you have a comment?
I do. So when we craft these updates to the code, we coordinate very closely with our zoning administrator, Vivian Swenson. And in terms of being consistent within our code and consistent with the way that she and her staff processes building permits, we try to look at equity and consistency. If we were to call out one use and delve into consideration of covenants, which adding that line to one building permit then begs the question, why aren't we asking that question on all building permits? And as Lindsay said, that then, even though it may not literally put the onus on staff, there becomes an implication that staff is now responsible for making sure that all the covenants are considered anytime we receive a building permit application.
Okay.
We seem to be using the term covenant interchangeable with easement. I don't think of them as the same thing. Is the whole easement matter that I'm concerned about covered by management of the covenants, or is an easement a completely separate legal entity?
It's a separate legal document, a separate restriction on a particular property. But it still would put the onus on the county to every time parcel 500 lot 1 comes in to apply for a short-term rental, they would have to do a deep dive title search on easements, covenants, restrictions to make sure that the use was permitted beyond the zoning, which is not something that we generally would do.
And do not want to do it.
We don't.
Right.
We don't.
I understand.
It's approved within the county per our zoning, and outlying restrictions that may apply to that property have to be enforced by other individuals. It's similar to a property dispute between two neighbors. A lot of times the neighbor wants the county to take enforcement and get involved, and they might not be violating a county restriction, and we can't.
You made it much clearer of the whys.
Good.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may
Yes.
ask for some further clarification. Who governs the tax identification for each lot? Is that done by the state or by the county?
I believe it's the county finance department.
Okay, so if I'm not the primary residence of a property and I'm doing a short-term rental, would that classify it to be as a commercial property, in your opinion?
If you are holding the property, but it's still a residential property, and you have the right to occupy it, you just happen to be renting it. It's not any different than me leasing the property. I'm still receiving an income. It just has more changeover.
I mean, the intent is not to stop people from renting their second home.
No, and I think what the provision put in here that someone has to be within 25 miles is an intent to make it so that you don't have the New York or Virginia or Connecticut property owner who's absent. You have someone that if there is a fire,
responsible.
correct, and can respond in a relatively short period of time.
So through Granicus, they have it so that if a complaint is filed, they will reach out to the property owner or the property manager of that property. So having them within 25 miles is, important in order for them to be able to address anything that might be a concern.
And if you get like 3 of them, they're on probation, or they.
We would take it case by case, I think.
Right.
How does the neighbor, whomever it is, know to contact Granicus?
So once we get to that point, obviously there's a code that's effective. They would, they have a hotline, which any property owner in the county could call and file a complaint.
Yeah, but Granicus isn't, I would say, breakfast table discussion company.
No, we would post it, it would be posted on the county website. We would make it so that,
Okay.
people would know about this hotline number that they could call. But also they could still call the office and file concerns. So, so either way, whether it's the office or it being that they call Granicus and file the complaint there.
So, I'm struggling with, so this activity of short-term rentals by the owner, whatever, is a commercial activity. Can we agree on that? I mean, is that? So I guess I would go further and say there are folks who would like to do other commercial activities outside of their home and are prohibited from doing so. So how are we justifying someone who might want to do some woodworking out of their garage as a commercial enterprise from this? I'm struggling with that, because both activities bring outside individuals into communities where people are used to knowing who's around our children or our grandchildren. We can send them out on the bike because we know Mrs. Jones is next door, but we don't know what's happening 2 properties down, whether the commercial activity is short-term rental or woodworking or alterations or working on a car. So I'm really struggling with that, how we're making that distinction.
So there is a home occupation use, where someone can have, a small business in their home, that's already a permitted use. So that's kind of an example of what you were talking about, someone coming in and out of the neighborhood, utilizing a home occupation, or picking things up, from a home occupation.
I think the distinction also goes back to it being a residential use with commercial benefits.
So if I can add to that, so if I have an apartment building, that is a residential use. However, it's within a commercial classification. And I believe in my line of work and my philosophies that using a transient use, whether it be a single-family residence or a hotel, is a commercial use. And if it is not your primary residence, you need to be classified as a commercial business. It is still a residential use under a different classification. And they should have a different class base for taxes and be, taxed accordingly.
But this would put them in the short-term residential use and subject them to the accommodation tax. So
But that's an additional tax that we use for hotels. So by doing that, that tells me that we're accepting that it is a commercial use, and therefore the county should change their status. They shouldn't get a Homestead Act credit, and it's not a primary residence. Therefore, they pay a commercial tax base of, 92 cents per square foot versus 40 cents.
So now you're going to turn a home within a subdivision to a commercial property.
It's a residential use being used as a commercial, yes.
So what is the distinction between that and if I have an LLC and I purchase a property?
Okay.
Does the homeowner matter?
This revolves around transiency. If I'm a transient, it's less than 30 days, which we've defined here by the code.
Right.
If I'm gonna rent, or you're gonna rent to me for 365 days or 700 and whatever days, a 5-year lease, whatever, that's different, in my opinion. This is a transient use used to make money. You're not, you can set your rates for rent at whatever you want. But these are used as a commercial-based operation, like a hotel, and they need to be taxed accordingly, in my opinion. And I think that we have some gaps here, but
Then going further into that, how would you differentiate I own a home and I'm going to rent it out on weekends for Navy games, but otherwise Monday through Friday I'm going to live there? Am I going to pay a commercial tax?
no, because you are the primary resident.
So that would be the distinction. A short-term rental for a primary resident would get a residential tax and everyone else would get a commercial. And then who's going to watch how many days an individual stays in the home? I think that's where county gets into a concern of enforcement and how we're going to differentiate the two.
Well, we're not enforcing anything now.
Yeah.
So,
And it is something that's fluid. It's something that can change. You put regulations in place and you find that a million of these pop up and it's not the intent, then you consider another amendment to further regulate or consider the owner occupancy.
Try not to say anything else.
I'd be disappointed.
So, what
We all
about,
would.
in this same vein of this conversation, Sylvester Farms, right? We own a few farms. They have properties on them with homes. I don't own the farm. I don't own that home. Sylvester Farms owns that home. So now, are we residential or commercial? And, you know, I'm against getting too, strict with this thing.
Yeah.
Just simply because of the farmer's perspective that, for whatever reason, we've never done it, probably never will, but short-term rentals may be an answer for them. And yet, they don't live on the property. They don't own the property legally. The corporation owns the property. But I believe they should have a right to rent it to whomever they want.
If there's a dwelling on that property, then they could apply for the short-term rental permit. I don't think that having a short-term rental permit on the dwelling would change the underlying taxing of the property. If that makes it worse or helps.
I don't know. That's why I'm a little worried about getting too strict and getting too down in the weeds with this thing. And sometimes you gotta pass something, I guess, because the county wants its tithing. That's what I look at this thing as.
You have a use that's...
And, so you very seldom you're ever gonna get anything perfect. I don't think you can pass any law that it's gonna be perfect all the time, but you pass a law, the regulation, or whatever it is, and then let some things filter out. We'll figure it out going down the road.
You're in a situation now where you have a use that's currently going on that's not being regulated. And so this is an effort to regulate it within the parameters that the county is comfortable regulating it, and also protecting neighboring property owners to the extent that the county feels is reasonable.
Mr. Sylvester's point, Hermitage Farm LLC actually owns all the dwellings, and it's covered by a conservation easement that says no commercial activity permitted. But the way I interpret our proposal today is that I would be eligible to get a short-term rental permit. Is that correct?
You could obtain the permit. It doesn't mean that the use is permitted on that property because there are underlying restrictions on the property that the county doesn't enforce.
Understood.
But correct, you would
Okay.
receive said permit, similar to if someone lives in an HOA and they come in for a building permit for a garage, the county will issue the building permit for the garage, but a garage may not be permitted under covenants.
Madam Chair, I feel like,
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know that I've had enough time to be able to support what is right here in front of me, to examine. I took a look at it, the materials were delivered to me. I read it over again. Obviously, it's a topic of conversation these days. Naturally, I've rented vacation homes before. I just feel like there's too many gaps here. And then to address the comments that we've heard in the last hour, I would like to ask for some consideration of, I don't know, to put this off to next month, to have some kind of workshop or some kind of conversation with planning and zoning. I know you all have had your heads in it for quite a long time, as you do with all these issues, and I really appreciate that, because I know what you're going through, and I know what Lindsay has gone through, looking for legal references. I just feel like I haven't had enough time to make a proper decision
Well,
on
we
this.
did that back in May, I believe it was. We tabled it so that we could get the Granicus reports and come up with a concise thing as a starting point for the plan, for the county plan for Airbnbs and VRBOs and temporary dwelling use. And here we are, and now we're gonna table it again. Or you're asking to table it again.
So I would ask if the preference is to table, is there specific information that I or Stephanie can provide leading into either a workshop or a meeting that would help you be able to make a decision? Or are there specific gaps that you want to see answers to so that you can make an informed decision at your next meeting?
One thing that's rattling around in my mind was the public comment regarding primary residence. Are we comfortable that that loophole doesn't exist in the rule that we drafted?
The way we addressed that, if I may, the way we addressed that was to put in there that they had to either be private residents or owner occupied, or they had to have a manager within 25 miles. That was supposedly the caveat to solve that issue, because that was one of the big issues back in May.
So why then did we drop our surrounding counties, according to Mr. Bateman's testimony, that the primary residence piece? Why did we adopt the 25-mile piece, owner-operator, as the chairwoman just stated? What was this decision behind
Because we
that
have so
verbiage
many
versus?
already doing that.
So there, of the 181, 50% of them are primary, 50% are they're not primary residents. So if you're looking at
the
what's.
25 was an attempt to reel in
Yeah.
those not
And-
primaries.
But still have something that's a safeguard.
It's a 25.
25 miles.
25 miles.
Mile
Yeah,
radius.
to still have a safeguard as for something, if there are concerns and there are enforcement issues, we have someone that can be
not in
contacted.
California.
Yes,
Right.
and at that point in time, contact the people that are renting the property and, tell them what they need to do in order to address the concerns. So that's kind of how that kind of evolved.
And to have 32 people as your guests, I mean,
And we don't, if you see in the ordinance, it does lay out the number of guests that you're potentially supposed to
It would
have.
address Mr. Kirsch's
Right,
situation.
you're
that
not
he
gonna be
outlined.
having 90 people or how many ever people that, some of these VRBOs, they'll tell you how many people that the house can hold. But it's not necessarily the number looking at, like, for example, if the property was on septic, the way the health department allows it is 2 people per bedroom, just because that's the capacity that a septic system can hold, and that's what it is designed for. So that's what's been baked into the capacity measures for the
you can't take a
ordinance.
bunch of, a barn and turn it into a bunch of bedrooms because it wasn't permitted that way. I mean, I've had personal experience where we were supposed to go to a house that slept 16. Well,
And
it was
it
a
didn't
bunch of
sleep
bunk beds. Hello. Surprise,
Yeah.
surprise.
Right. So that's kind of the evolution of that.
Just one final thought, though. Even if a manager is within 25 miles, that doesn't mean that an LLC couldn't own it. Is that correct?
An LLC could still own the property.
Or a corporation from out of state?
Right.
Or a foundation.
But they have to have someone that's within 25 miles
Okay.
of the property.
That would be able to answer
Could
to.
answer to
any
concerns and-
Concerns, comments,
yes.
questions, complaints, enforcement actions.
Okay. Do you still feel that you necessarily, you still need
Yeah,
more time?
it's the commercial usage in the neighborhoods that bothers me. But
So,
here we are.
So, let me give my viewpoint. It's, I believe sometimes we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? And then to support you guys, I think actually you were very thoughtful and pretty thorough and came up with a pretty good proposal. I didn't think it could possibly generate this much discussion, but I stand corrected. But I think that it's pretty important that you got 180, 190 people out there that are out of compliance right now. That, and we don't consider them terrorists or criminals or, these are people not unlike ourselves probably, that we should try to get them where they're not out of compliance.
I hear you.
So can I get a resolution?
would love to do it, but I have no idea how to do the findings of fact on this thing.
Could I be helpful?
I can try it. I can try it if you want.
Would it be helpful if I went through the findings and there was discussion and then there was a motion to approve
That would be wonderful.
based on those findings?
Wonderful.
Okay, I'm here to help, you know?
I'm so glad you offered.
You know, I gotta do something. So first, as noted in the staff report, you have to find a consistency within the comprehensive plan. And I think some consistency that has been laid out in the comprehensive plan relating to tourism and transient uses, which are supported, have been established, but of course, you all need to consider those recommendations. Is that, yes, you agree with the
Yes.
comprehensive
Yeah.
plan? And feel that the regulation of short-term rentals does promote land use, economic development, and tourism?
I agree.
Okay. Also, that the character of district or zone and suitability is appropriate for this particular use, and that's looking at the land use, section 4202. And that would be the residential uses permitted anywhere that a residential use currently is permitted.
Agree.
And that the regulations established within the ordinance promote the public health, safety, and welfare by establishing the time limit. And I do think it's important to note that the time limitations within the short-term rental ordinance at 8 p.m. currently don't exist, to my understanding. So that's a benefit established on these uses that currently isn't otherwise there. Providing adequate light and air, I don't really think is applicable in this situation. Preventing environmental pollution, again, a residential use, I don't think that offering it as a short-term rental really exceeds any pollution that would exist as an owner-occupant, but of course you can disagree. And that there's adequate transportation, water, sewer, schools, recreation parks, and other public facilities. Those are your findings.
And there was one more that they wanted to add, the short-term residential rentals, the use and occupancy of a dwelling unit for a fee for less than 30 days, consecutive days, through a hosting platform utilized by a transient occupant. A short-term residential rental is not a bed and breakfast.
And I think the intent of doing that was there was some concern about an individual selling their home and then renting the house back to the seller to give them time to move on for 30 or 60 days, and whether that would be a short-term rental. So that was put in there to preclude that situation from applying here.
Right.
So if you are comfortable with it, your motion would be to make a recommendation to the county commissioners that the proposed text amendment is consistent with the county comprehensive plan and the findings within chapter 18.
Exactly.
We need to make the resolution.
We
then?
need to make the
Yes.
resolution.
Madam Chair.
Bottom of page 4.
Yeah, I got
That
you.
might
No,
be
I got
helpful.
you. I'm with you. Madam Chairman, resolve for the comprehensive zoning code update that the planning commission makes a favorable recommendation to the county commissioners regarding county ordinance number 25-09 to allow.
24.
I'm sorry, you're right, 24-09 to allow short-term residential rentals in dwelling units as a supplemental use in all zoning districts with specific conditions, as well as to add a definition of short-term residential rental and amend applicable definitions.
We're gonna add the following findings.
Well, we just did that, I thought.
Yeah, so I think,
Previously discussed findings fact.
yes, as long as you all agree with the findings that
Yes.
were discussed and are included within the staff report, you can adopt those findings as discussed.
Okay. Do I get a second?
Second.
Okay, any more discussion?
Yes, please, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Although I do agree in principle that we need additional regulation on the short-term rentals, specifically to address any fire and safety concerns, to regulate and generate additional revenues that we've been losing in this county. I would like this board maybe to consider, or maybe as we carry forward, as we move forward to the county commissioners, instead of having the business license fee $500 or whatever that is, maybe increase that business license fee to a higher number instead of changing a tax status. Additionally, I personally feel that we are leaving a hole for sleeping units and not getting that addressed in this particular unit. I agree with some of the constituents that primary residency does have an impact as far as status of the properties and maintenance. However, with a life safety inspection, we'll at least know that the guests coming will be properly protected. And the other question I have is, if these are going to be regulated by a business license, maybe Amy could help us with this, or Stephanie, how does that impact a new business creating a commercial establishment? How does that impact the fire department? We have for new businesses and residential establishments being created where they have to meet with the fire department and make an offer to increase, some impacts that they may have. In your opinion, does that fall within that category, or does that require additional research?
I think that would be additional. So a business license is not required by this. It's a zoning certificate that would be required through our office. So the business license would be separate, but they do have to pay to the finance office the 5% hotel tax that you were
So because
referencing.
it falls under zoning as a zoning certificate, they would then have to follow the rest of the zoning regulations, which mean they may have to offer to meet with the fire department to discuss any potential impacts.
That's correct. The fire marshal would review this application. Yep.
Let me just ask a question. The sleeping arrangements that Jeff seems to get hung up on, wouldn't that make it a bed and breakfast if you're just given a room?
Like a rooming house.
Potentially that could be the instance of a.
Well,
of a
they're
bed
not
and-
covered under this.
So you mean as in if they were just to rent a room as opposed to the whole house? So that is covered under here. We would, if someone would just want to rent one room or, half of the house, we would qualify that as part of the dwelling unit. And they could get a zoning certificate for that.
But if I have the accessory structure above a garage and they're not serving me breakfast, I'm renting off Airbnb a sleeping unit because I don't have cooking provisions.
Usually
Therefore, it's not a dwelling unit.
And that would not be permitted if this were, well, it's currently not permitted, and if this were adopted and effective, it would still not be permitted.
Because we're only regulating dwelling units.
We're only permitting dwelling units. And so that scenario would be a prohibited use, subject to enforcement.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to, if I may, suggest an amendment that the property owner or the property manager make a personal visit to the property for each rental cycle, a check-in, if you will. I mean, I think the onus, putting the burden of enforcement on planning and zoning and whatever other entity in the county is not fair. I think the owner needs to, just talk, as one of the gentlemen referred to, remote check-ins. These people are just punching in codes. I think it's reasonable within 24 hours that the property manager or the property owner check in to make sure there's 10 people checking in and not 27. That the parking situation is as it should be. I would, like to add that as an amendment for consideration.
Do I get a second on that amendment? I guess that didn't go.
I guess I don't have any friends.
All right. I don't know that that's the case, Kat. Okay, so we have a resolution on the table. Any more discussion? Then I'm going to call for the question. Yes, sir?
I know I've had my 3 minutes, but our immediate concern, the house across the street is in excess of 25,000 square feet. Maybe there should be something in the regulations about the square footage. To be able to have a 25,000 square foot house and rent it
Sir,
out.
thank you. And you'll have another opportunity at the commissioner level to make additional comments and suggestions. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We're not taking any more public comment. We're past that. Anything else as far as the commissioners go? All right, let's call for the question. All in favor?
No.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
I'm voting in favor, just to make that clear, and an explanation of my vote is because we have to have something in place to regulate what's already going on in the county.
Right. And we're taking a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Bruce is here. Okay, we're back in order. Next on the agenda is the county commissioner-sponsored ordinance 2413. Stephanie Jones.
Yes. All right. So this, as you mentioned, is a county commissioner sponsored text amendment. Sorry about that. This is to define indoor shooting range and then to include it in the urban commercial, suburban industrial, airport protection and Kent Island Gateway District, and the suburban industrial business employment districts in the county. Within all of those districts, it would have to be located more than 100 feet from any residential use. But that is pretty much the simplicity of that text. There is a little bit of history. We've gotten requests about this use before. We've been basically guided and indicated that because we have what a use is called a shooting club, it's not specific whether it's indoor, outdoor, in that essence, but we've been guided to say that legal counsel has said we need to include the use of indoor shooting range so that it is specific, and then it should be located in commercial and industrial districts. Doing some research around the state, that's where they are located, in your commercial industrial districts. But this would allow for that indoor shooting facility to include the shooting of firearms, training purposes, indoor facility for also gunsmithing, retail sales, physical training, and educational purposes, all within that that facility. Let's see. So this is specifically for the land use of that. Obviously, there's other regulations outside of what land use has when it comes to the indoor shooting range, but there are restrictions on the ventilation that would have to be required when they go through their building permit review. Also, there's restrictions and requirements from OSHA in regards to sound and also the lead exposure. And then they would have to address the lead as well because it is a hazardous waste through an abatement plan. But those are all done, that is done outside of.
Is there
the county.
a restriction on the time in the evening?
No, not at this time. So this would be a permitted use. There's no time restriction. No.
But if they meet the noise and everything, I guess it's going to be covered anyway. Okay.
What are the noise? I'm looking for the noise limitations.
So you'd be looking at page 3, top of page 3, end of page 2, I think. So this comes specifically from OSHA. It has to be, I believe, 90 decibels with a weighted average over an 8-hour period. So that is specifically, obviously, addressing your the occupational, the people that work in the facility, but obviously that's going to impact the greater noise of the entire facility itself.
I'm coming back to what Sharon just asked. 90 decibels is not quiet, I don't believe. And you're 100 feet from a residence shooting 11 o'clock at night. Now, is that fair?
Well, I mean, it depends obviously on how late they're open, but most of these districts that we're looking at to including them are not adjacent to residential because they are commercial or they are industrial. So in the most cases, they would not be located next to residents, but there could be times when they're located next to commercial apartments, which would be a permitted use in a commercial district. So there is that essence that could occur.
But the 90 decibel is for the inside?
Yeah, so that's specifically for occupation, the OSHA's requirements for
There's no requirement outside of the facility?
Nope.
Have you been next to one of these?
I have not, but there is no requirement.
I've been in Las Vegas where they fire off machine guns. You can hear them pretty good across the street.
Are these for machine guns too?
That would come down to
handguns.
that comes down to outside of land use as to what guns can and cannot be utilized there.
Oh.
But in essence, give me 1 second. The noise, the county does not have a noise ordinance. So there are some counties that do. We do not have one in Queen Anne's County, so there's no specific other, I guess, mechanism, to overcome that. There's no requirements at the state level when it comes to the noise from an indoor shooting range. The building code, like I said, requires for the ventilation specifically because of the lead, but that is the requirement of the mechanical part of the building code. There's nothing else in the building code. It doesn't specifically outlay that use. It indicates that you would have to utilize a similar use. In most cases, they look at it as like a bowling alley is what they would, similar use. But obviously the person that is designing the structure has to meet all standards that are applicable to the mechanical code for ventilation.
I can offer some, while the county doesn't have a noise ordinance, we are beholden to MDE's noise control standards in Comar. And in, what was it? In 2012, MDE relinquished enforcement responsibility to the local jurisdictions on the limits of noise control. So that enforcement generally is a public nuisance that falls to the sheriff's department, but there are limits between daytime and nighttime dBAs, the allowable decibel level readings. There are limits between industrial, commercial, and residential uses during the day and night. And I believe this would fall under, I'm going to say, commercial or industrial? Commercial. Fall under commercial. So during the day, I just lost it. During the day, that limit is 67 dBAs, and at night it's 62. So even though it sounds like you're allowed to be louder indoors, leaving the site, if it should become an issue, there are limitations, and there is an enforcement provision that is in Comar.
Where did the 100 feet come from?
So I've looked at other, the same use throughout the state, kind of in other locations. Anne Arundel County does allow indoor shooting ranges. They recently changed it from 400 to 100. The distance. So that's what, that's kind of where I pulled it from.
And other counties are at 100 also?
Other counties, they specifically, I didn't see 100 feet in other counties, but that was where I specifically looked at. Some counties didn't have a distance from residential. But by adding it, I thought it would be appropriate to do so. For the specifically
Far
in the
away does a
commercial.
chicken house have to be from a house?
From a house?
Yeah, from a residential unit.
I don't know.
Oh, there's limitations, aren't there? I can't put it. I'm just curious. I
don't know, Bill, do chickens make a lot of noise?
Oh, they stink.
Oh.
You know, they have their own, and they're not as bad as they used to be. I'm just curious that, the 100 feet just seems awfully close.
Property lines, yes, but I don't know of any from a house.
Yes, you're right. It's setbacks, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's setbacks.
It's from
Yeah,
the
you're
property
right,
line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that necessarily puts it away from any residence too, the setback, correct?
Not
If
necessarily.
it's a 150-foot setback,
It
right?
could, from a resident on another
Yeah,
property.
you're not
Yes, it could.
gonna have somebody else's house sitting 50 feet, sitting on your property from the chicken house, so it's necessarily a.
So we have the.
But I'm just, look, it's a silly kind of question. I was just trying to make a point that we have more serious regulations for a chicken house next to a home than we do with a potentially pretty noisy business.
It's an indoor range, Bill. It's not outdoor.
It's not
And
outdoor,
there's
correct. It has to
sound
be.
attenuation that gets built into it.
Have you
to
been
protect-
next to one?
Yes.
So have I. It's pretty noisy. They can be pretty noisy, and it's not that the noise doesn't bother me per se, but the noise at 11 o'clock at night, I think, is a fair question to ask.
I do
think-
have to say, most of the sidewalks in Queen Anne's County are long rolled up by that time.
Yeah, I would say.
We just had a half-hour discussion, or an hour discussion on, you know, what I thought would take about 10 minutes, you know. And, you know, I'm sitting there trying to look out for, I live out in the country. I can guarantee it's never gonna bother me. Of course, state put one up with no hearings anywhere, so the entire town of Queen Anne has to listen to that outdoor range all the time. But it's not gonna ever bother me. But what about a guy that's down there, you know, down Route 8 somewhere? I don't know where all these places are.
I have an answer for you if you'd like.
Pardon me?
I have an answer for your
Okay.
question if you like. Rob Gunter, Development Review Principal Planner. So a regular poultry house must be, if it's being built new, at least 300 feet from the common property line when an existing residence not located on the property is within 300 feet or less from that property line. So 300 feet.
300 feet, yeah. And my point, it was rhetorical in nature, right? It was a little bit silly. It kind of got the response I wanted. But that we take things that can be a nuisance. I'm not saying that the chicken house is a nuisance, but can be a nuisance, and we set them away from residences, particularly people that live there already, right? You know? I don't have too much sympathy for people that move in and then say want to change everything, but somebody's lived there already. 100 feet just seems close. You know, you don't want to pass it, I'll vote with you, but
The commissioners evidently want us to do it.
I'm not here for them. Don't take that wrong.
So at the time that the resolution is read, do the staff comments beginning on page 1 and on into page 2 and 3 need to be incorporated in that resolution? Is that what?
Probably needs a consistency,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, so in addition, you have your code, which obviously you need to make sure that this particular use in these particular zones is in compliance with the policies of those particular chapters. But then in addition to that, under the land use article, you have to make sure, kind of consistent to that the zones proposed are suitable for the use and that the proposal will conserve value of property and encourage orderly development, which here you have a commercial use proposed in zoning districts which permit commercial uses. So it's not a use being proposed in an outlying residential district or something that wouldn't support those zoning districts.
Still confused as to how I would
So
You don't have to do the comments.
do that. Do I need to read them all, or?
You don't have to read them all.
Okay.
You can, so you're looking at, for consistency with the zoning code, you're looking at the bottom of page 1. And then for consistency with the comp plan, you're looking about middle of page 2. You wouldn't have to read all of those. I don't think it would be necessary, but to
Have an overall finding that
Yeah.
the proposed use is consistent with the zones.
All right, can I ask a question here? Can we change it from 100 to 300 in our resolution?
If there's a majority vote to make that
that's all I'm
amendment.
saying.
Yes.
You would be making a recommendation to the county commissioners at this point, so you would be recommending that it would be, in this case, sounds like a further distance is how you would.
Same as a chicken house. Yeah.
Is that how you, or exactly as a chicken house?
Yeah, just like that, just like that. Like at 250,
That's how they would have
300 feet.
to-
That's not that far.
The one thing you wanted to contemplate, though, these commercial industrial properties are generally
Tighter.
smaller in size.
Tighter.
That is one thing, you know, if you're looking at farms, you're looking at hundreds, 200 acres. Commercial properties, sometimes you're looking at, you know, less,
Exclude it just by that definition
just by
alone.
that definition. Or most of the property, just in that sense.
Do we have more discussion with the commissioners? All right, public comment. Do you have Zoom? Really?
We have people that have been coming in, but no one's wanted to make comment yet.
Okay. All right, moving on, can I get a resolution?
Before you guys do, can I give you another sense of a setback? I am gonna look up outdoor shooting range to see if it has one specified, I'm not sure. No, it doesn't. But an extraction use, a mine, 200 feet from any residential boundary line. So it's less than the chicken farm for a
Yeah.
mine. But that gives you a sense on what those two types of uses.
Mines also have restrictions on day-night decibel level at the property boundary
Yes,
as well.
theirs is 65, 55 and not, because it's industrial. So it's got a little bit
At the
less of a bar.
67, 62. Who's arguing over 2 decibels?
Well, and the nighttime, depending on the time of year, usually triggers, what is it, 7 o'clock, I think?
Between 10 and 7.
7 a.m., yeah. So what we think of as night, I mean, it could be the morning, but I doubt one of these places is gonna open at 7 a.m., so.
Might I offer Mr. Sylvester, there's options of restricting hours of operation if you're concerned about the 11 o'clock shooting, right? Am I correct? We could always restrict an hourly if you're concerned about the decimals late at night.
Well, I am to a certain degree. I feel sorry for someone who's, Sharon's age, lived there her entire life.
Did he really go there?
And all of a sudden, 11 o'clock at night, you got 308s going off next door.
Sure. But I'm worried, as is Ms. Jones, that, right, the industrial zone is set up to be somewhat smaller, more concentrated in their activities. And they may not have the acreage available, that another way around that
I
distance
agree.
restriction would be a decimal restriction.
Right.
I can add to that conversation if it's helpful, because it's a smaller property, they'll have a harder time reaching 67, so they'll have to do some abatement inside the building for sound attenuation.
Sure.
So that's up to them.
And it's
They-
on the-
They
and
have
it's
to
on the
meet the
applicant.
distance at
Right.
the property line, because that's how it's measured. It's at the property line,
At the
it's not at
property
the
line.
residence.
Okay.
So while it has to be set back 100 feet, if the setback in that district is 25 feet, well, that's their setback for sound, is 25 feet, not the 100. So by the time it gets there, it may be 45. I don't know how
Right,
sound
right.
drops off,
Yeah, I
but
understand that, yeah.
And I would think that if it was near a residential, it would behoove whoever has the shooting range, whoever owns it, is gonna want it as soundproof as possible, because they aren't gonna want the aggravation from all the neighbors, if it's close to a residential. But that's my 2 cents. At my old
Yeah,
age.
at that point, it would come in with those specifics. Yeah.
Now, will this have made it into the
Since
minutes?
it's at the property line, not at the
Yeah,
I
that's
guess it'll be
part of the
posted
minutes.
now,
Part of the minutes
right,
now.
right.
And one thing we've learned from the mines, because they always have trouble hitting their sound marks
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
That's why you typically see the mines put these big giant berms in, because the sound hits it and stops it, and then they plant trees on top of that. So all of these are gonna have required landscaping. If they have buildings next door, cars going by, it's all gonna disperse that sound. I'm not saying you're not gonna hear them, because you probably are. But it may not be 67 at a house. I'm not sure.
That's a problem, then. We don't know.
Okay, can I get a resolution?
It resolved that the Planning Commission makes a favorable recommendation to the Board of the County Commissioners regarding Commissioner-sponsored text amendment number 24-13 to define indoor shooting range and add indoor shooting ranges as a permitted use in Queen Anne's County within the urban commercial, suburban industrial, and airport protection and Kent Island Gateway, and the suburban industrial business employment districts. Within all districts, the use must be located within 100 feet of any residential use. The Planning Commission provides the following findings: that by adding the permitted use of an indoor shooting range, it supports and creates employment activity. The comprehensive plan indicates that non-residential land uses need to be removed, or need to be reviewed and amended appropriately. That the indoor shooting range would provide a niche for tourism and provide a destination in itself. That the indoor shooting ranges are governed by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They will be governed by the international code cycles, which will help regulate ventilation and lead. And they will also be governed by the U.S. Department of Labor, addressing permissible noise exposure limits.
Can I make one change in your, are you finished with your resolution?
Sure.
May I make one suggestion of a change? You said it must be located within 100 feet of residential.
I think you did.
Can we delete the word within and minimal, change it to minimal of 100 feet?
Well, it
He said
reads,
within 100
but it
feet.
reads
Yeah.
must be located 100 feet from any
The wording
residential
is
use.
offered already.
So the wording is there, he's within.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you also don't want to prescribe, in the language that's there, it says it must be located 100 feet. That's telling people it has to be 100 feet. It can't be under 100 feet is what I believe it should say,
Right.
at a minimum of 100.
Minimum change within.
Otherwise, the way it's written, it has to be 100 feet.
But he said within 100 feet.
Okay, I see what you mean. You're stating as you want it to be able to, it can be
A minimum
minimum
of
of.
100
It
feet.
can be great.
Is
Right.
that
Must be located
agreeable to you,
It's
Mr.
At
awkwardly
least.
written, and I think Jeff sort
Okay.
of made it
A minimum
slightly
of
more
100 feet.
Right.
correct.
And then look to the zoning and subdivision regulation consistency, which you'll find on the bottom of page 1 for additional findings.
So additionally, it is currently shooting clubs and ranges are permitted as a conditional use within countryside and agricultural districts. And this would expand that, consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Do I have a second on the resolution?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So be it. Next on the agenda,
Sorry, Amy, I tried.
County Ordinance 2414, Stephanie Jones.
All right, this is the last one. As well, this one is a commissioner-sponsored text amendment. So this amendment is basically to further ensure that for any farm employee dwelling unit that is located on a conservation easement will be exempt from impact fees. So currently within the county, if someone was to apply for a permit for a farm employee dwelling unit, and it's located in the agricultural district and on a MALF property, they're not subject to paying impact fees. But this text amendment will further allow that to expand it to the countryside district, which is potentially agricultural uses, but just located in the critical area. And then it also elaborates, currently it says MALF districts, so it will expand upon that, include other conservation easements like land trust and MET easements. So it further elaborates on what's existing in order to not require someone requesting a permit for an
What was the thought
impact.
process behind this?
The-
The reasoning?
The reasoning, I think it was meant to be, I think when the impact fee was all done, a lot of those conservation easements weren't as well prominent as MALF probably, and now that they are, they should be incorporated, and there's an intention to make it, uniform across all agricultural districts and agricultural easements that are out there. So I think that's,
Any discussion from the commissioners? God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you.
There being none, any public comment? I'll call for the question. Can I get a proposal? Or a resolution? Proposal for a resolution.
Resolved that the Planning Commission makes a favorable recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners regarding Commissioner-sponsored text amendment number 24-14 to add the countryside district to the list of zonings which no development fees shall be imposed on farm employee dwellings within a conservation district easement.
As well, it will add conservation easement, covenant, or restriction reserved or donated to MALPF or MALF or other conservation easements as listed in the ordinance. The Planning Commission provides the following findings of fact. The amendment is not permitting a new use. Farm employee dwellings are permitted as an accessory agricultural use on all forms. The purpose of the countryside district is included in the applicable laws attachment, but generally to preserve and protect rural and agricultural areas of the county. This amendment will provide equality across both the ag and the countryside districts and include all conservation easements as listed in the ordinance. Also, although accessory farm employee dwellings are not workforce house by definition, the intention is to provide housing for those that are employed by the farm. By further exempting impact fees for farm employee dwellings on all conservation easements and within the countryside district, there is an incentive to provide housing for employees. The comprehensive plan highly values conservation and preservation of farmland. That's it.
Do I have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So be it.
Farmers are always the easiest. Just saying.
Any public comment? With that being said.
Madam Chair, I
what-
have one comment, not
Okay.
necessarily public, but from the podium here, and that is to bring my colleagues on the commission aware that Eastern Shore Land Conservancy has a phenomenal presentation that I saw at a recent conference about evaluating properties by the acre and commercial versus residential and parking versus open space. And that will be presented at the upcoming, I get this wrong, Planning Commission, something, forget the name of the conference that they host every year. It's in October. It's not a public meeting, but what I'd like to do is ask permission that John could send out a link to that. It's very pertinent to what we do. It cites examples from our county and Kent and Talbot, and they're very enlightening as far as the value per acre put on certain types of development and what that brings to the community tax base, what that brings in resource allocation, et cetera, et cetera. So with Amy and John's permission, I'll send you the link to that. It's in
That'd be great.
mid-October at Chesapeake College. And I think it's, if not, the link we can send around so that you can watch it on your own. It was amazing how localized the data was from a company that did some work for ESLC. I think they're out in the Midwest, somewhere Chicago area, but it was very relevant and relative to what we'd make on a decision like today, as far as commercial and residential uses in the community and what that brings to the county on many levels. So that being said,
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Did you say we can, it is open to the public or
It
it's
is not. It
So
is
the
it is
Chesapeake
the
College
annual
thing-
meeting of, it is not. It's
Okay,
it's
so
the
you're
it's the
gonna do
annual
it on-
meeting of the state, county planning, and it's a long,
Are you
I don't
part of that,
remember the
Jeff?
name of it, but I remember seeing
it's the annual meeting where we would go to get certified in, it's the,
Oh, that's okay, we're not invited.
it's not open to the public, which is when I am not disclosing all this information.
Yeah.
It's more relevant to what we do.
Okay.
And it happens to be in our backyard in October. It's a planning commissioners and Court of Appeals group meeting that happens annually, right, where we get certified or something. It's similar to that.
This time of year, we get there are so many conferences
Yeah.
going on that I have this commingled in my brain. So
And I'm slaughtering the purpose of it, but it'll be outlined in the email that John will send out to everybody. I'll send you the link if you'll disseminate for it.
Speaking of that, there's also the Maryland Planning Commissioners Association that is teamed up with Maryland APA, which is American Planning Association, for a joint conference in October. I believe it's the 17th, 18th, 19th. Unfortunately, I'll be in ICC in California, so I won't be able to attend. But it's at Turf Valley. It's a long weekend. They have over 40 classes being offered, short courses. It's a short conference that similar to the one we had last year here, for those of us that attended
Right.
and had the dinner. They're doing a dinner and everything again. there's significantly more classes since they teamed up with APA. So if you have time that weekend, it would be welcomed and appreciated for attendance.
We'll send out information on the.
Thank you. And if I could get
Motion to adjourn.
a motion.
Second.
My favorite, adjourn, yeah.